Well, welcome to a Forever Bristol City podcast special. It's finally happened. Finally happened after, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks. We have a new head coach, and that is Gerhard Struber. Welcome to the Austrian from everybody here at Forever Bristol City podcast. I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Neil Sutton, who's with me here, and Herr Fevs, Dave Fevs, who's operating from home. What do we think, guys? I'll start with you first, Dave. It's has it been a long time coming? In the press conference, Chairman John Lansdowne thought it was quite a speedy process. What do you think?
I think it really boils down to the fact that we knew Liam was going much longer before it was announced, and we probably knew before it was even, the real rumours came out that it was something was on the card. So you have the kind of pre-rumours, the rumours, then the announcement, which seems to have dragged on a lot longer. I think you go back to maybe Steve Lansdowne's pre-playoff interview on Radio Bristol, and there seemed to be a little bit of discontent. And then Liam's interview, on the morning after the playoff defeat, it was almost like, I want to get this done and dusted so I can start concentrating on Norwich. That's how it kind of feels, albeit that's, with a little bit of hindsight. And I've got to say it, guys, fair play to both of you to try and rock a Gerhard Struber haircut on, day one of announcement.
Yeah. And let's get it in early. I wonder how long it will be into the season before somebody says Uber for Struber, but hopefully not. I mean, Neil, it's been pretty obvious it's going to be Gerhard for, I'll say, the last 5 days. Yeah, and it is. So what do you think? I'm a little bit excited. I've seen him in the press conference. He's something different to what we've had. It's more inspiring than Manning, I would say, just as an appointment.
Well, yeah, very different personality to Manning. Comes across in that way as well. But I think the thing that struck me, obviously we'll get into the press conference itself, but John just really doesn't like answering questions in a direct way, does he? And he's you ask him one question, he goes off a tangent and comes back and has forgotten what you've asked and then answers a completely different question. But he did drop a couple of things in there, and one of them was that he wasn't involved in the initial interview with Struber when there was the thing of whether or not he was interested in it, and B, that there was a couple of people interviewed.
Yeah,
he said a couple of interviews. So there was other people that were spoken to. It just wasn't. You got the feeling he was always their sort of first choice, and it's a brave appointment.
Yeah,
it's a really brave appointment because he is a man who comes across as speaking his mind. He's not going to just sort of. If they wanted a yes man, and John has said in the past, one of the reasons, that the Phil Alexander appointment didn't work out is that he likes everybody to agree in a room, and everybody's got to have the same feelings on stuff and agreement on stuff, and everyone's going to be aligned. You get the feeling with Struber, if he's not happy about something, he's going to be saying he's not going to be happy about something. He's not. He doesn't strike me as a man who's necessarily going to toe the line all the way through. So he's going to have high expectations of us, alongside us having expectations of them. Of him, rather.
Oh, it's interesting you make that point. I think there was one probing question, Dave, one of very few probing questions during the press conference, when he was asked about how he left Cologne. That's a correct pronunciation, because they were second in the table. They'd had a bad run, not as bad as some of the runs we've had down here. But do you think that was the only question I thought he sidestepped just a little bit? How did you feel he addressed that?
I think you don't want to really talk about the past, do you? I think I think he answered it with just he's happy for his staff and his players that they went on to get automatic promotion and win the league, and but now he's concentrating on us. I think the other one he didn't really answer very well was the one about, I think someone said about the squad, and I don't think necessarily the question probably got worded a way that you could quickly understand what was being asked. But I thought he might, had he perhaps understood the question better, he might have answered that a little bit better, because he kind of passed that one a little bit as well.
How do you think the interview process went overall, Dave, from what we know, which is a square root of F all, really? Yeah. Do you think the likes of Rob Edwards were at the table? Celes obviously told us to do one because he knew he was going to get Sheffield United. Would somebody like Chris Wilder have come here, or might he end up at Middlesbrough? Do you think it's been a rigorous and vigorous process?
I think, once again, outside of you looking in, Dave, I think you could have hundreds and hundreds of applications, and most of them you'll just toss in the bin. You've already got an idea of the kind of person you're after, and if they don't apply, you go out and ask them. So I think, there's a lot of stuff would be done between agents, isn't there, as well? Sounding out of is X interested, is Y interested? No, they're not. Okay, fine. But you don't want to take that too much further. So I think you narrow it down pretty quickly. And of course, if they then all dodos in the interview or other things happen, then you kind of quickly have to move on from them. I would be amazed if Rob Edwards wasn't interviewed, or at least sounded out. Whether the timing of Carrick's departure influenced that or not, I'd have thought we'd have perhaps had a discussion with him, and I'm sure he'd have been interested initially, and then maybe things changed. Celes has probably been going on for a while. I think both of them probably would have been pretty key contenders, I'd have thought, for the position. Would you agree, guys? But you don't always get first choice.
What do you think? I mean, there was only one on that list, and it was quite a long list of possibles. There was only one on that list that wholly underwhelmed me, and that was Luke Williams, the ex, what was it, Forest Green?
No. He said Notts
County. He did it with Notts County and Swansea.
Yeah.
Richie Wellens, I was a bit meh about him, but the rest of the list, it was okay, wasn't it? And didn't you find it strange when the chairman said that he didn't do the first round interview? So who was doing that all-important long list interview? I certainly wasn't asked in my capacity.
Phipps and I have been pretty much speaking daily or whatever, messaging daily over the last few weeks, I'd say, in relation to this. It could well be the case that it did go to an outside agency, I think, in terms of some agency actually getting involved in sounding out, because does the chairman have to get involved in those initial conversations as to whether or not he's interested or not? I don't think they do, really. I think you can leave it to various other people to do the sounding out to see whether or not, if they were doing it, and then you can get your shortlist down from it. But it was there's a lot of jobs out there, isn't it? I mean, they're slowly, QPR just about to announce today. I'm sure Middlesbrough will follow, and
Sheffield United,
and Sheffield United, yeah, but.
I think get anyone
on the head with Celes there. Celes have been tapped up weeks ago in relation to that. From all accounts, what's his name? Wilder. Name escaped me for a moment. Wilder, they knew he was going at the end of the season because it was almost akin to, if you're not going to get promoted, then we're going to look. So they knew, agents know, Celes knows, right, okay, you're in consideration for this. So he's not going to start selling himself short in the nicest possible way. By coming to us, we are an attractive proposition rather in this division. I think and I think we're a better proposition than QPR, certainly.
Yeah.
Middlesbrough, always, you've got a good chairman there, Steve Gibson, and they always seem to not necessarily recruit well, but I mean, Finn Azaz there, who could easily have been with us.
Tommy Conway.
But Finn Azaz, they're talking about him going to the Premier League for 20+ million again. Yeah. So he's their next big sale. And they actually, in the last few years, have been far more successful in their player dealing and transfer dealings than we have.
Yeah, Dave, do you think Gerhard was first choice?
I made a post on OTIP that he could be 62nd choice if the 61 before don't want the job or turn out to be rubbish. He ultimately has become the first choice, and we've appointed him. I suspect I think if you take those three names we talked about, Struber, Edwards, Celes, and to an extent all the other names that have been thrown out there as well, they've all got skeletons in their cupboard. They've all, whether that's relegations, whether that's having a bad season with someone getting sacked, or even just not having the necessary experience. They've all got good bad bits. But I think those three probably just kind of move into that kind of slightly better level of manager. I think that, you know, in terms of if you were going to rank them in a list, you know, you'd have those probably as your top three. I don't think that, you know, people might disagree with one or two and move, but they were all in the ballpark of being sensible appointments if any of them were appointed, I think.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I'm happy with it. It's exciting. It's the first foreign coach we've had since Benny. Dave, he talked in the press conference, and I thought he spoke very well, Gerhard. He talked about, you know, a style of football that was compatible with the players that we've got here. I mean, he's probably been doing in-depth analysis on this from probably the moment he knew he was going to get a second interview. I mean, what's your view about that comment? And I'm sure you've deep dived on some of his statistical stuff, as many people have. What's your thoughts on what we can expect from a Struber team?
I think, you know, the higher intensity is going to be the key to it. And that's both with and without the ball. You know, certainly you know, I mentioned this on Paul Binning's Spaces as well. You know, we didn't hear any talk today from John of, you know, a young progressive manager who plays front foot football and high press. You know, we didn't hear any of that crap, did we, today? We let Gerhard explain what it is, and I've got some notes, but my handwriting's so bad I can't really read them. But, you know, it's very much going to be higher intensity, and that means we're going to try and win the ball back a bit quicker. We're going to try, you know, he'll use the term, we're going to play vertically, and people might think, oh, that means we're going to play direct. No, we're not. What he's going to play is we're going to play with, you know, we're going to try and break the lines more. You know, whether that's playing out from the keeper or when we get into the opposition half, we're going to try and break through lines and try and pass vertically. You know, there will be times I watched about 100, if people heard this on the pause space, I watched about 150 goalkeeper distributions yesterday on Voice Scout, just to kind of try and get a sense of, I think people had said, oh, well, if he's playing vertically, he won't be playing out from the keeper. And then someone else, I think it's Mythic on OTIP, the Hungarian guy, said, no, he builds out from the keeper. So I'll go and have a little look at that. And what the keeper does or did with Cologne is he plays a lot of, you know, high-paced passes. So rather than like dribbling it out to your centre backs or, you know, chipping a ball to the fullbacks, he drives the ball at players, and they obviously receive the ball and, you know, have got that little bit more time and space to then make the next move. So I think you'll see that. Goalkeeper was happy to play 30, 40-yard passes from the edge of the box straight down the middle of the pitch to one of the central midfielders to receive. So you'll see a lot more of that, unlike, you know, the kind of passes that Max was playing into Knight and Williams at Blackburn and Portsmouth away, you know, which just put them unnecessary pressure. I think what the players know is how to create that kind of movement to create the space for receiving that type of pass. So I think that's probably what we'll see. You know, and I'm not averse to, you know, trying to knock a 50-yard ball straight into the centre forward.
Do you think, and I'll ask Neil what he thinks as well, but since you said you placed a lot of emphasis on how you said the way they play on the goalkeeper, on what you said and Max O'Leary, do you see Max, being able to deliver what Struber would expect from his keeper?
He'll need to improve based on what all of us have seen from Max's distribution. I think he fits the sweeper keeper part of what Struber will want. He's pretty good at that, you know, playing high behind the centre backs, but he'll have to improve his distribution.
What do you think about what Dave just said, Neil, and you yourself, what you've read on Struber and his style? Are we likely to see two up front? Are we likely to see Hirakawa and other wingers as starters?
Well, we've got some difficulties, I think. As a squad, I think we've got some difficulties. There are some obvious weaknesses to the squad going into next season. There's some areas that we fell short on. There are a number of players, key players, that are coming into their final year, or whether it be an option year or final year. You've got the Naki Wells situation. You've got two misfiring forwards up front. You've sold Palmer Holden already, so you haven't got a young striker necessarily to bring through from the under-21s to fill that gap. you know, I don't think, and Dave will correct me wrong, he normally plays a flat back four, doesn't he, Dave?
He's a bit mixed. If you talk about Liam Manning very, very quickly, Liam was very much, I'm playing two holding midfielders, defensive midfielders, central midfielders, whatever you want to call them. That was a given, and I played one up front. Those were, nothing changed ever in any shape that Manning played in those three positions. It was always one up top and it was always two central midfielders. If we look at Struber, once again, you can only go by, some of the data you're given and watching a few bits and pieces, but his kind of non-negotiables appear to be two strikers, a number 10, and one central midfielder. And I think everything else flexes around that. I did watch a really good interview from when he was out with New York from one of the kind of fan podcasts out there, where he talked about the only reason you're saying it's three at the back is because the three players I played, right back, centre back and centre back, were more centre backs. So effectively he was saying tactically he might sometimes play a centre back at right back because it might suit the opposition. They might be hitting diags to, that side, in which case it suits him to do that. But invariably, they still play the same kind of shapes. So it's more about players playing in different positions than necessarily being a back three or a back four. It's more about the kind of use of the personnel in that. I'm not sure if I've described that very well.
No, I think to some extent, sorry, Neil, I think to some extent it picks up on what Send for You has written up there. He says Struber plays 4-4-2, 3-4-2, 1-3-4-1-2, 3-5-2. It's variations on that theme, and we can't be too rigid in that respect, because it's like sometimes with Pring, is he playing as a wing back, is he playing as a left back, is he playing as a left of a two, or even left of a three? Yeah. Well, I think it's fluid, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's key for next season is there isn't any money, substantial money in the transfer pot. So if that's the case, and John didn't really answer that question.
No.
Again, went off and
he didn't
answered his own question.
He did the usual in front of the camera, like he's in a bloody hostage situation.
And to be fair, I mean, we'll get to that conference in a short while, but dealing with this question. So we have got a significant first team squad who are entering their final year. And you've got the Knight quandary, who's perhaps your most sellable asset. And then if everybody's to be believed, you've got some player like Randall potentially coming in to that sort of role. So you get the feeling that Struber's going to have to do a bit of trading here.
Yeah.
In relation to it. He's going to have to generate some scope and space inside the squad to bring his players in. Because if we're talking about a pressing up front, Mehmeti, Twine, Armstrong, Fally, they're not pressing players, are they? I mean, the one player that made a huge difference to us in the last 4 months of the season was one that was somewhat maligned for the previous 5 months, was Earthy. Earthy's energy and Earthy's press allowed him to play alongside Wells, with Wells as the one guy up top, and our press as a team got that much better with Earthy. We haven't got Earthy this season. So what do we do to create this team because that team that Struber is talking about at the moment, I can't quite picture some of the current players playing in that team.
That's a good point. What do you say about that, Dave? And is it simplistic of me to say we've lost George Earthy, but we got Josh Stotes back, who has extended his contract to 2028? I mean, what's your views on?
I think just going back to personnel and pressing. Certainly, I wouldn't include Anis Mehmeti in that list. I think Anis he's a Duracell bunny. He's got a lot of energy and could play in there if he was played directly behind two centre forwards. I think we have to go back and look at. There's a big difference in playing two centre forwards and a 10, and two 10s and a centre forward, which is what Liam Manning did, and how that triggers the press. So I think we have to wait and see how that evolves. I go back to the first few games of last season, and Sinclair Armstrong was brilliant in the press. He just only lasted 55 minutes. So let's kind of, I guess with a lot of these things and the whole kind of Struber thing, let's wait and see what we actually, get to see in pre-season and season before we write any players off. The players sometimes that we think are, shoo-ins to be Struber type players might be the ones that don't, and some other people come out of the kind of fringes and suddenly become key players. That can happen as well. I think the bit that kind of is probably the area where I think we are a bit of a worrier is probably on that kind of right wing position, where we've got Sykes and Hirakawa. Now Sykes might double up as a wing back if we play a back three. I don't know, but we don't really have a left winger as such. I know Mehmeti plays there, but he's really a inverted left winger stroke number 10, isn't he, really? So
Morrison, Dave.
Sorry
to throw that name in there. Sorry, Dave. Morrison, winger or wing back?
Left back. So I think
Raheem Nelson as a winger.
Yeah, possibly. And again, then run into are we going to play wingers or not? So yeah, I think there's lots of things. I won't turn you around and show you my lovely little magnetic board on the side behind me. But once we start to see how,
for those watching, for those listening to it as a podcast, that's very helpful. But there we go.
That's my little board of all the players.
He lives and breathes it. He lives and breathes it.
Yeah, no, only because I think as we go through pre-season, we'll see different things, and we can plot players into centre forward or number 10 or whatever. But until we see how Struber plays, we might not play that way at all. In which case, it becomes all a bit futile.
I think that's the key thing for me. I think when you get a new manager in, and they ask, what type of football are we expecting to see from you? What type of how are you going to play the formations and all the rest of it? There are some times where you get into the first couple of months of the season and it's not working. Yeah. And they have to adapt, and they have to look. We're a club at the moment that cannot go out and buy 8 players.
But who can? Who can? Other than parachute clubs.
So what you're doing is you're having to work with the squad that you've actually got there. The one thing I was saying before was the amount of players that are actually, I know that Pring and Tanner have signed new contracts, but the amount of players there who are going into their final year. So arguably it's the last chance.
For Mehmeti?
You're talking Viner, you're talking Mehmeti, you're talking O'Leary.
Yeah.
God, the list goes on.
You're talking some players.
And you're talking about the Cornicks, the Roberts, the Hayden Robertses of this world. All of these type players are going into their final year. So if you're not going to give them a new contract, if they're not going to be the type of player that you can see in the system, do you say, right, let's try and move these players on? And it's a very difficult market. It's a very difficult thing to actually move players on in the Championship, because the Championship, if they're sort of average players inside the Championship, where are you moving on to? League One clubs they haven't got the money. They haven't got the money to move on to Championship players. So you're subsidising moves elsewhere. Well, if you're subsidising moves elsewhere, as we saw with Cornick, you might as well have him as part of the first team squad if you're going to be sort of loose on it. I think Struber will be a little bit concerned that this much vaunted academy. I said 23 minutes on OTIB, and obviously Dave corrected me that it was 36. I knew that Dave would know the exact number.
What was that? Sorry.
When I put on a couple of my posts on OTIB, when I put 23 minutes and you correct me, it was 36. Oh my God, yeah, academy 36 minutes. I mean, that's pathetic, isn't it?
It is.
That's pathetic, really. And some of the decision making last year from Manning was really not done with forethought to future progression. It was done for the here and now and the short-termism, and whether as Dave sort of alluded to, there was almost like a thing going through once we got past January. The decisions that were made in January for me, sorry, we're digressing a little bit, but the decisions that we made in January were indicative to me of a club that didn't actually think that we were going to be achieving anything at the end of the season.
Which we did.
Because they didn't want to give him the money for the transfers, because they wanted to call him to account for the overspend in the summer. But then he decided to put Naismith and Atkinson out on loan as well, and that came back to massively bite us in the last month of the season in relation to it. Yeah. So when you're running a small squad, Manning made the decisions that he's got to be accountable for. The club made the decisions, and then somehow we fell into the playoffs by literally one Blackburn goal, one Blackburn goal.
And we played, whatever the statistics say, we finished 6th.
We did, and
right?
it's a fantastic
I just posed the question, which is not for discussion here, but I posed the question: what does success look like next season? Because you could get a 10% increase in your points total, which, rounding down, puts you on 74. That might not guarantee a playoff place in some seasons, but equally it might. But 68, that's the lowest it's ever got in there. Dave, player trading, Neil's referred to that a couple of times, and players being out of contract, spoken about Max O'Leary. What you know, and I've had, I'm not in the know, but I get people send me texts, talk that we're going to announce the signing of Adam Rendell from Plymouth. If you look at him, as I'm sure you've done with his statistical, where he fits in, are we getting in a replacement in advance of Knight leaving?
Yeah, quite possible. I think just talk about trading overall, and picking up on some of the stuff Neil said, which I tend to agree that we're not going to have a lot of money. Trading's going to have to be key, but and I'm going to probably be a bit naughty here and say, from what Liam Manning said, in various interviews towards the end, and what he said at Norwich, and there was a kind of day in the life of Liam Manning one that he did there as well. It seems to me Liam really only wants to buy in better players, not develop them, which is a kind of poor indictment of the choice of him as a Bristol City manager in the first place. And I think we heard John read John in the initial announcement, and subsequently in the press conference today, talk a little bit of disappointment that Liam Manning didn't bring through the academy players, and we heard then Gerhard talk about that a little bit. But going back to trading, you don't have to spend a fortune to improve your squad. What you've got to do is you've got to exploit low value. And if any of you have read or the book Moneyball or seen the film, which is a poor imitation of the book for those of you that have read the book as well, it's finding those markets where you can exploit. And Bristol City are in a pretty favourable position over the last few years of being a fairly stable Championship club, looking to move forward, give their players opportunity to improve themselves and move on if the club hasn't moved forward. So I think we're in quite a good position for that. And we've seen us kind of exploit markets like a League One team with players who've played 100 Championship games, i.e. Jason Knight and Max Bird. And we've exploited their contract situation. We've exploited Derby's finances, and we've used that to get 2 good players in. Rob Dickey, we took a situation where he probably wasn't in the best of form at QPR, had a year left on his contract. The year before, people were talking about him going to the Premier League for 10 million, but his form drops off. We saw an opportunity. Whether Mark Sykes tapped him up on a trip or whatever because he knew him from Oxford, who knows? But we got that. We picked up Hayden Roberts. However he's managed, we picked him up on a free transfer. We picked up Mark Sykes on a free transfer. Players are out there without having to spend a fortune. And if
Tanner being a good case in point.
Sorry,
George Tanner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's played 100 games in the Championship or however many games it is now, something like that, isn't it? From a guy we picked up for 275,000 from Carlisle. Who, to be fair, I watched a load of video of him when he signed, and he looked bloody awful. But there we go. He was a player probably because of his Man United academy stuff that people thought were worth, maybe taking a bit of a punt on him, and he's developed into a pretty steady Championship performer. He's got some limitations, don't get me wrong, but that's the kind of signing we do. So kind of back to your question about people like Adam Rendell, yeah, possibly a succession for Jason Knight, but if he's going for the kind of amount that we're talking about, 500,000 to 750,000 because he's got a relegation release clause, that's us exploiting Plymouth, who've also not got there. They were looking to get investment. Had they stayed up, they probably would have got that investment, and now that's kind of gone out the window. So I think someone like Randall is a sensible one. And if the other player that's been mooted around is ML Reece Jacobson, the Preston guy, on a free transfer, you can't go wrong with that, really. He's an experienced Championship goal scorer.
I suppose that shows
we don't have that Barnacki.
that shows how far we went away from that last summer, isn't it?
That's
And
exactly the point, then, Neil, isn't it? Yeah,
we went
deviated
away
from
from that, and we got caught. We got caught badly.
Yeah, and it's cost us because, and it's cost really the incoming manager, because what we've done is we've frittered. Is that the right word? Frittered away the Adam Scott money. Really, that's what we've done.
No, we have, because if you look at it, I mean, I wish Liam Manning's infatuation with Darling, who he's already signed at Norwich, is replicated again with Twine, because I
don't think he's going to be that stupid. And
but Dave said he frittered it away. We frittered away the money on Armstrong, on Mayulu, on Twine, and I'll say Hirakawa wasn't a great deal of money anyway. And then we went out and bought, and that was unlucky what happened with the centre half, McNally. Yeah.
I think McNally arguably was our best centre back last year.
Yeah, had he been fit? Yeah.
He was a big loss going into the
last few do you think then, Dave, that we have to accept, because he started, the players are back for training less than 2 weeks away, Tuesday, July the 1st.
25th, they're back in.
Is it? For testing?
Yeah, for testing.
All right, so they're back. Right. Do you think we've got to view this as a season of transition to Struber ball, or do you think we will be active in a significant way in the transfer market between now and the end of August? That there might be a few surprise departures. Do you think he's going to bring in? Do you think he's going to know one or two players in Bundesliga 2 that might come left field? Do you think we might see a Zach Weiner, servant of the club for very many years, but out of contract next summer, as Neil's pointed out? Do you think we might see a few go for fees that are, oh, really? Only that? Just to reshape it, but at speed?
I think there will be a bit of that. I think you look at the squad we've got, and I'm kind of one of the ones who back in January, if you had to say whether I was happy that we didn't give them any money or did give them any money, I was quite happy that we didn't blow any more money. I thought it was the right decision to make, because we'd overspent, and I guess what I was looking at is, what are we going to do in the summer? Because the chances of, we might have hit the playoffs, but the chances of getting promoted were pretty small, weren't they?
Yeah.
And I know you say, well, if you get in the playoffs, anything can happen. Yeah, it can do, but it's still kind of, that much opportunity. So I would rather we didn't blow the money in January, which we didn't, and try and, at least keep a sensible, financial footing for this summer. So at least we can probably trade negative. So we could, if we generate money, we can probably spend it. And of course, what we've also got the luxury of, if it happens, is we might get the Semenyo money. In which case,
I mean, that's what the live feed is saying along here at the moment. Remember, Semenyo may go for 70 mil. I think he's probably likely to go for 40, just reading a few comments and looking at what other players are going for. And we've got this situation where we're losing 20 million a year before player sales. So if Semenyo sells, let's say we got 8 was the sell-on clause. Biggest sell-on clause we've had since Yannick Bolasie was sold by Palace to whoever it was. Everton, which was about 3.5 million. Let's assume that money comes in for Semenyo.
6 million we got.
Let's say we get 4 million for Semenyo, and Uncle Steve puts 4 million of that in the nest egg. It's not a bloody nest egg, because there's no eggs in there anyway. He keeps 4 million. We're still going to have losses of 16. But let's say he has 4. How much do you think we've got as a spend this summer before any Semenyo money, Dave?
I guess my simple answer is that I don't look at it in how much can we spend on transfer fees. I look at it, what's the playing budget for the year? And that player budget really is made up of 2 things: their wages and their amortization. If we sign someone like Emil Rees, there's 0 amortization. It's all wages. So let's just say we've got a budget of 20 million this year on playing, and that's wages. And if we sold Hayden Roberts for 500,000 and say he's on, let's just make it a nice easy round number, 10 grand a week, that's £1 million added back into the budget. That means you can buy Adam Randall on 10 grand a week, and if he's only costing us 500,000 over 4 years, you're actually making a profit.
Yeah,
because that's the way the budget will be working at Bristol City. Not we've got 5 million for transfer fees, because you could go and buy a load of free transfers and use it on wages, and you know this, Dave, because you're an ex-accountant. So
one term that you haven't used yet, Dave, and I'll ask Neil to give his view first on that, and then you, Dave. You know, it wasn't the favourite thing of Nigel Pearson's to exploit, but the loan market, and it plays into what Dave was saying there, that we've got 5 strikers on the books at the moment that couldn't guarantee. Naki's the one most likely to get into double figures. You've got Naki, who's out of contract anyway. I think it's bye Naki. I really do. Yeah. Naki, Harry Cornick, Mayulu, Armstrong, and Bell. Right?
Are we literally saying Bell? Because Tinian called him a 9. We haven't to think of him as a 9, are we?
But right, why don't we, let's say Naki goes. Yeah. But then the others, if you put Armstrong, and even if you pay half their wages and get them out, could we not do 2 clever loan signings for a year? That's the word I was going to use.
So
loan signings.
So Naki, I would be very surprised if Naki re-signs, only because he's going to be one of the major earners at the club.
Yeah.
He's at the age that he is now, 35 now, and there's a new manager coming in, and he's going to look at his budgets and he's going to think, I need the type of players that I want. He would be taking a chance on re-signing Naki. I think if Manning was still here, I think Naki's prospects of actually getting a new contract would be that much more. I think with the new manager, it's a big ask for him to make a decision on a player.
Ball's in Naki's court at the moment, isn't it? Because we've offered him a contract. So if he accepts it, tough shit.
Yeah. We've offered him a contract. Right? But that was sort of a few weeks ago, and we offered Tommy Conway a contract a couple of summers ago, and then circumstances changed. Allegedly, we pulled it back, because you might say, I don't want Naki.
For a player who's out of contract, we'll have put we've actually gone out officially and said we've put a contract on the table for Naki Wells, haven't we? That contract for an out of contract player has to be valid for at least a month, unless both parties decide they want to take that offer off the table, i.e. they've both decided one. So Naki, assuming he's still in that month, because I don't know when the dates were, Naki could turn around and say, well, you offered me, I'll accept it, and we'd have to take it. Now, I don't think that'll happen anyway, but that's the legalities of it, if that's the right word. But actually, I look at Naki Wells. Naki Wells might think, this guy plays 2 up front. I'm going to be getting minutes every week. Why wouldn't I sign? Why would I go to Bradford and take probably a percentage of the money I can get at Bristol City? And don't forget, Naki Wells earned every penny of whatever wage he got last year.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's out of the question yet. I think it would have been he would have stayed if Liam Manning was staying for sure.
Yeah.
I think that would have happened. I think there's some debate in it now, but I don't think it's he won't be staying. I think there's still a pretty good chance.
You think there's a good chance? And what about Harry Cornick? Do you think somebody might come in for him, or is his wages so good that it?
Yeah, I think now he's only got a year left. You can start to be a little bit smart with what you offer him out for, because you're not trying to sell him and then pay his residual wage for 2 years. You're only doing it for a year now, so there's probably a little bit more scope to do something if the right club comes for him. But once again, Harry Cornick might think, got a guy here, likes energy in the front line, likes a presser. What am I? I'm a presser. I'm getting a guy that's going to play a bit like I did at Luton. I might do well here. I might hang around a bit more. But we don't know yet.
Sorry, Neil. I just want to say a couple of people on the text feed are saying there's a fantastic wildlife has said Naki will be on more than 20 grand a week. I don't know the figures, but Naki when he joined in January 2019, or I think it was then, Naki when he joined probably was earning a wage in excess of 20 grand a week, but when he signed that 3-year contract that's just expired, is on less than half of that. Yeah,
he's probably on between 12 and 15. I would,
I would have thought.
I'm not saying that with any confidence.
No, but that's still quite a big That's still quite a big wage. I mean, what's your view on loans? Because somebody's picked me up here, said that if you get loans, you've got the wages to pay. Yes, you have, but you've also got a fee.
Yeah, so let's look. I'm going to once again revert to kind of history here. We got a pretty good loan deal from Burnley for Scott Twine when we signed him. But not only did we get had to pay the loan fee and some of his wages for that first 6 months he was here, we then had to pay a fee and another X years. Ultimately, that deal was not a good deal for us. We could have done a much better deal than that if we'd have tried to sign him in January. So that's kind of just something to be mindful of. I'm okay with a loan if it's got probably an option or an obligation to buy, and that obligation might be a set number of appearances, it might be playoffs or something like that, but I don't want us just to take loans for the sake of it, because we don't want to develop someone else's player. I'm really firmly behind Nigel on this. If that player has got no chance of becoming our player, I don't want him. So I wouldn't have done a George Murphy last year, for example. I'd have persevered with Josh Stokes.
And Josh Stokes then for you, Josh Stokes for you is going to get quite a lot of minutes this season.
If he plays well, he'll have to do the same. Struber's been pretty clear on that. They've got to deliver, haven't they? So anyone who delivers has got a chance to get minutes.
Somebody just said on here, some of the team were on 28k a week when Pearson took over. Clever comps.
They might have been then. They weren't by the time he'd done his wheeling and dealing with them.
I think that may be Callas, isn't it?
Yeah.
At the time, sort of.
Callas was on a big wave. Casey Palmer was on a big wave.
Yeah.
Legacy.
I think all the Chelsea trio,
Jay De Silva probably
Chelsea
as well.
trio that all left on freeze and we paid big money for, wasn't it?
Let's not believe that Matty James was on 28 grand or anything like that, because he wouldn't have fit the budget at the time he signed. That's people, people who look at Sport Track and Capology websites for wages. Probably you're better off checking Football Manager.
I think the key thing for me, I'm just having a look on the transfer market about people that are out of contract this year, and they're next summer 26, and they still have some value. So if you are looking to do some trading, if you are looking to go back to what we do best in the transfer market, and that's what Dave obviously alluded to when the picking up of the free transfers, the looking at the players, the targeting of where there's value. And that's what we went away from last year. And it hasn't really been properly explained what happened last summer, whether the blame lies with a technical director, let's just leave it there, or it lies elsewhere. But we went away from what we had been doing pretty successfully for a number of years. And we went to, we wasted money, wasted a bit of a legacy. But going into it, Anis Mehmeti out of contract next summer. Rob Dickey, I know there's an option year, but you would still have some value there. Max O'Leary coming into his last year. We need an upgrade at keeper. We just do. Zach Viner, hell of a deal that he negotiated by all accounts. He's going to have to renegotiate, or we say, right, okay. Ross McCrory on an option year, but again, there might be some value in him. Rob Atkinson, Portsmouth are interested, I'm sure, and other clubs will.
Josh Campbell-Slow has signed a contract, so that says something, doesn't it? Doesn't it?
Yeah, I think they're minimal amounts though on those academy.
Minimal amounts for wages, but strategically.
But Hayden Roberts going into last year, if you got an offer of 100,000, 150,000 for Hayden Roberts, would you be interested? Harry Cornett, Marcus McGuinn.
More for someone like Hayden Roberts, Neil. I think.
Sorry.
I think you'd get more for someone like Hayden Roberts.
I'm just saying, just an analogy. You get 10,000 off your wage bill, so theoretically, and you get 150,000. All goes in the pot, Dave, doesn't
There's some players of that ilk, and you've mentioned Roberts, who I think if you look at my lovely magnetic board, and you've got Elijah Morrison at left back and Cam Pring, and then you've got Tane Anderson behind him. You kind of think, well, actually, Roberts could be blocking your pathway. And you don't sell Roberts to recruit another left back. You say, actually, it's Cam Pring, Elijah Morrison, and Tane Anderson. Those are my three going forward now, and I go with that. And therefore, Roberts becomes free to use somewhere else. And I think that's the way to look. I think the other players, someone like Sam Bell.
Sam Bell's not even on there. And of course, you've got the Sykes situation. Sykes going into an option year. You know, Sykes is a good player at Championship
I
level,
think
and
the good
he's
thing
gonna
about
have
Sykes is his versatility. I think once again, I don't know who Sen for you is. I don't know if he's an overseas guy or whatever. So apologies if you are or aren't. But I think Struber's played like a diamond, and he's also played like a 3 in the midfield with a 10 and 2 centre forwards, and he's played like a right-sided central midfielder. If that makes sense, a bit like the old kind of like Brownhill role. I could see someone like Sykes playing there as one of our kind of squad rotation options as well. So I think, and Sykes is quick as well, and I think that will be a real big bonus to a Struber. So I think anyone's got pace and athleticism.
Huge miss at the end of the season gave us a huge outlay on that right hand side. Fantastic, probably the best crosser of the ball, and the runs in behind. That's what we missed. The late goals that we were scoring, those runs in behind.
That's what we'll see.
We just lost because the balls would go into you, and he'd want to come back on his left foot rather than his right foot. He's a very different type of player in it, the Hirakawa. But all of those players, Dave, they've got contract situations on as well. So if you're a new coach coming in and he's saying, right, I'm coming in on the 20th, they're coming back for testing, I'm going to meet my team. He's going to have in his own mind the team that he wants. If he sits down and he was confronted by 25 players that were all on 3-year contracts, right, I've got these players for 3 years to work with, and I move forward.
And that's the other thing. He hasn't. No. Am I right in thinking, Dave, that Cologne don't have a great deal of money? Is that right? Yeah.
They're on transfer. I spoke to your mate
Tim
Capel, Tim about this, who commentates on Bundesliga, doesn't he, Dave, from memory, or Eurosport or something like that. But he was saying actually that I don't think German football gets parachute payments or anything like that. I tried to look it up, but I didn't. I ran out of time. But I think upon relegation, they had to cut their cloth quite a bit. So I think there's a lot of people saying, yeah, they're a big side, in terms of Bundesliga 2. But then again, there's probably 7 or 8 really big sides in there as well. There's like Schalke.
And what I was going to say with that is because I would imagine 2 months ago, when there was probably half a dozen games to go, Mr. Struber sat there thinking about next season. I'm going to be managing this team. We're in the top division. We haven't got a lot of money. He's going to know what's good in Bundesliga 2, that he can afford rather than cross-track. Do you think he's going to have any influence? Is there time for him to have influence in potential overseas signings?
Yeah, I would think so. Whether we go that route or not, I don't know. But just going back to Cologne, they sold their. I don't know if he ended up top scorer, but he was certainly top scorer for a lot of the season. They've sold him to Hoffenheim for 5 million. So that was a kind of pre-arranged deal, I think, in January that he was going. I wonder whether that might have had some impact on some of the results in the second half of the season. But I think I'm hoping he can, it's about exploiting markets. And if he can do a David Wagner, like he did at Huddersfield, where he went and found people like, what's the guy who played on the right-hand side?
Simani?
No, before that, he went to Bolton after. I can't remember what his name is now. But he found players from Bundesliga 2. I think there might have been one who came from like the regional football beneath that level, but he signed them for like under 1,000 each or whatever, and they became like mainstays of his.
Well, look at that player that Leeds United signed, the Japanese guy, Tanaka, wasn't it?
Tanaka, is it?
Tanaka. He didn't cost. He cost them £1.5 million. So all right, let's bring things to a close over the next 10 minutes or so. Thanks to everybody who's been watching this while we're recording it live. Record number we've had on here. Thanks, Robin, the Robin's Nest. If you're the Robin's Nest that's doing all these videos on YouTube, well done. Some great content
give them
there
a watch,
as well.
people. And
if you want to DM me, come on the podcast, you're welcome any time there, Tom. But what did we think of the conference? What do we think of that press conference? Neil, you had some strong views on that because the questioning was so low key. It was like being, as Margaret Thatcher once said.
We know that John is going to do about one of those a year.
Yeah.
anybody expecting him to do one for the start of the season and one in January, that's him. I was picking up on the way that he talks, wasn't I, to a certain degree as well, in the way he doesn't, you ask him a question, he doesn't feel quite comfortable asking that question, so he goes off and answers another question. But then, for me, the journalists there, they were almost akin to, right, okay, this doesn't happen very often, and they're probably looking at it thinking, I can't get too controversial.
They don't want to ask they don't want to ask the elephant in the room question, of which there were two.
Well,
and one didn't even get touched on.
No, the big question, obviously, you're probably talking about is Tinian. Now, for me, you could just go social media, blah, 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 blah. But it's been reported in the Sun. It's a national newspaper that is saying, potentially, you're director of football, you've got a new manager coming in, your technical director, head of recruitment, whatever role you want to give him, is linked with, in national media, this. Brian's not here today. Now, he would normally
have been. That's the question.
And
did he do the first round interviews?
Well, there was Struber at the start. He went, stopped, and then he said, oh, thanks to John for the interview, and then paused and went, oh, and Brian, as like a sort of an afterthought. But Brian's, that is the question. If they're waiting for the right opportunity to say that, today was the right opportunity, because you're not going to get...
Nobody asked the question.
No, they didn't. And John Lansdowne at that top table there could easily, he might not give him an answer, but what he would have done is said, well, Brian's, going through other opportunities at the moment, we're having a review that, he could have answered that question, because normally he alluded to, there was a question, why are the comms so rubbish at the club almost? And he said, well, we don't like saying anything when there isn't anything to say. Well, there is something to say about Tinian, because he's a key figure at the club and he's linked on national newspaper and social media to other job opportunities. So you can answer that question if it was asked.
But that's what I'm saying. The depth and the hardness of questioning is like being savaged by a dead sheep, isn't it? Because it's almost like we don't want to, as you said, we don't want to rock the boat. What did you think, Dave? You saw the whole conference.
I think, first of all, that the intro from John, after Dave Barton, explained the process, I thought was incredibly bad. He literally just said, well, we've appointed Gerhard, and then kind of left him. And it's like, shit, address the people in the room, for God's sake, rather than just like handing straight over. And he did that at the fans forum a couple of years ago. He literally went, thanks for all coming, and then moved on. It's like, this is the guy that's supposed to be leading the club, lead it. So I didn't think that was very good. There were a couple of bits where I think, I wasn't quite so cynical as Neil on whether the couple of mentions of Brian were kind of like stilted or not. But I did think it was quite interesting that John at definitely John at one point said the recruitment staff and the technical director, whereas previously, John's always said Brian and his team. So that kind of gave me some hope, if nothing else. But I think it's an interview. You're not going to go in there and go all guns blazing to a new manager appointment. It is what it is. It's that type of. Let's see what they do.
I'll be honest. I think. Sheridan was noticeable by her absence, unless she's on holiday. But the lesser spotted Dave Barton, our head of something or other to do with communication, did the intro at the start of it. And I'll be honest. I think in a situation like that, where you've got two people that aren't particularly used to being interviewed, there should have been three of them sat on that table, and that was the head of communications with either side saying, question from you, whereas it was very much Dave Barton saying, here's the chairman and here's Gerhard Struber, and then John, you lead off, and then John uttered about two sentences, and then immediately threw the ball, as in the conversation, like a red-hot potato to Gerhard Struber. I think we've got three people running comms in this club, and it's shite.
I think as well, Dave and Neil, I think we'll see a first day in the life of Gerhard at some point, won't we? I think last year's Liam announcement video, they kind of like saw all the kind of media walking out, and then players walking out of the meeting, with Brian as doorman in effect, kind of like shaking everyone's hands. They went out. Be interested to see whether he features in any videos. I think that'll probably be more of a telling sign that if anything is happening there. But I don't think Brian wasn't sat on the top table with Liam Manning last time, so I don't think that's obvious. I think it's all the stuff around it, And if there is a story, I'm sure the media have been told don't ask it because we ain't going to answer it. So I don't think it was the right time.
And they might have said that before they went in. And look, the long and the short of it is none of them are great communicators in the way that the silk-tongued Mark Ashton was. But there we go. But look, I mean, we are where we are. I think having seen the interview with him, you got to give the man a chance. He does play attractive football. He's never managed anywhere more than about 85 games. So I'd love it if he saw out his contract here, because I think if he did see his contract out here, it would mean that we have achieved a modicum of success. And, that modicum of success, we got to the playoffs. The next one is to get to the playoffs final. Even if we lost that, trying to get auto promotion, I really think is beyond us. I'd love to be proved wrong on that. There's so much going to happen over the next few weeks because there's a new kit that's coming out. I don't know too much about our pre-season, where we got a pre-season camp. One thing that we haven't talked about, and we'll say this just to wrap up, and that is his backroom staff. John Lansdowne made it perfectly clear that as of lunchtime today that Chris Hogg and James Krause are both still employed by Bristol City, which means that, if they're still in that situation 10 days' time, they got to be there for pre-season training.
They won't be, Dave.
No, Dave, they're on their way, aren't they? And what do you think Struber's going to do for his backroom team? Do you think he'll bring in two people, including that guy who's recently resigned at Red Bull in the States?
I couldn't remember if I mentioned this earlier on here or on the other one. People probably get fed up with my voice by the end of the day. But the guy from Red Bull New York, Ivasevic, if he's coming as a coach, I don't think he'd get a work permit.
Right.
So because he's not done enough assistant manager experience to meet the work permit rules. Once again, it's funny, isn't it, when you download a PDF from the FA months ago about manager appointments, and you end up having to use it, and then you're looking at one for work permits. But there we go. That's the sad life of Fevs. But I think the other one I can't remember. Is it Eibner or Eibler? I can't remember.
Eibner was his assistant, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was it Cologne or was it Salzburg?
Yeah, at Cologne, yeah. He would pass the work permit rules, so that's a possibility. I guess the other question is, I'm assuming Pat will stay on as goalkeeping coach, and and Alex Ball's been around, whether he'll stay because of other reasons, like as I say, other coaches. You can't completely bring in a whole backroom staff. Although there is a little technicality, you could probably call them all assistant coaches, and you could probably get round it that way. But we'll see what happens there.
Neil,
I think it's always a bit bizarre because I remember that when Corberan was sacked by Rovers, they were linked with the manager, and then he couldn't get a permit. I can't remember who it was. Was it a German guy? Off the top of my head, German guy, and then he went up to Scotland.
Yeah,
it was a bit bizarre.
Scotland got different work permit rules for players, managers.
That's bizarre, isn't it? Because it's
it's bizarre. That's why you've got.
So he couldn't get one down here, but he could get one up in Scotland, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
it's always a bit weird.
That's why you've got got that issue on compensation as well. That Scotland, because it's outside of English FA, you can move to Scotland for like 300,000 and get FIFA compensation rather than have to go through the tribunal system here. So there's little kind of bits of hustle you can do on either side.
I mean, I'm glad that we've got it done now, rather than a month from now or whatever.
Well, that would have been an embarrassment.
It gives. But if Manning was going to move, at least he moved early. It didn't drag through the summer. There wasn't this huge period of uncertainty and everything throughout the summer. At least we've done it at the start, and at least when they start coming back from on the 25th of March, we can start moving forward. But
25th of August, July,
24th,
June,
25th of June, yeah, 25th of June. But for me, there's so many questions for Bristol City this summer. It feels like a real period of change, not least obviously the new manager, but the playing staff, the backroom staff, the possible new direction of the club, possibly, as Dave alluded to, Fev's alluded to, going back to a little bit more holistic way of actually recruitment, where you're actually
just a bit of direction, bit of focus, and being consistent.
Well, we had a bit of money, and we all got a bit excited, didn't we? And we overpaid for Twine, we overpaid for Armstrong, arguably we overpaid for Fally, and then McNally, to me, is the only one of those
got cropped
that has got some value in it. He's come from Burnley. He's very well thought of there, but he was in the commentary side that got to the playoff final there, and it was a real shame what happened to him, because he was having a fantastic debut season for us. But he's the only one of that group that I think has retained any sort of value as such. The others,
well, it's been wasted.
That nonsense from Tinian about we could have sold them for double what we bought them for, it's just like, oh, come on. Realistically, you're not playing players, and then you're actually sticking one out on loan back to Austria.
I think, and Dave, you might have seen, we were talking about my good friend Tim Capel. You might have seen he does a lot of writing on sports books, and there was a clip that he put with a guy who does all the scouting, and he says 90% of player watching now is done on video. So I think one thing we can put clear here, that when Brian Tinian said they'd watch Fally play 40 times or something like that
on video,
they'd watch 40 video clips, because gone are the days when you, like Jock Ray back in the 60s, 70s, even the 80s, driving up the motorway to watch a player. Clive Middlemass and Terry Cooper used to do that.
And in fairness, why wouldn't you? In terms of your network of people to cover 40 matches of someone live. One, it takes a lot of resource. Two, it's a highly inefficient way of doing it. If you've got to watch someone 40 times to work out whether they're any good or not, as I said, I watched 150 goalkeeper distributions on Y Scout the other day in about half hour, and that covered six Bundesliga matches.
There you go.
That's the way to do it. But that's not to say you shouldn't have eyes out there as well.
No,
watch something, and that's why Mayulu was watched by Liam Manning, who actually went out to Austria.
I got to laugh about the clips coming up here on the text feed. None of them about you, Dave. They're not repeatable. Dave's camera's gone.
Sorry, I lost you.
John Allison, you're a bit slow, mate. Uber for Struber. I had that right at the start of the podcast, yeah? All right. And I like what Steve's put here. No, Dave, they watched the same clip 40 times.
Yeah, they probably didn't realise it was the same clip 40 times, did they?
Anyway, right. I know up on X as a Spaces that Dave and XR Robin have done. That's up there for listening. I know, Dave, you're doing, and this is for people that are watching this live, yeah? Because this will be uploaded on the podcast platforms later. But I know, Dave, live at 7, One Stream in Bristol are doing a piece are doing a podcast. So Dave's going to be on that. We'll be back with our next podcast on Thursday of next week. That's when the fixtures come out at midday, not at 9 o'clock. So we'll be doing a fixture special. But in the meantime,
where we can celebrate away to Wrexham on the first
I think it's going to be away to Wrexham.
Or away to Birmingham.
I think it's going to be away to Wrexham. And look, we're going to have our first, I'm going to say this now, our first 9 games of the season. No, first 10 games of the season, we're going to have 4 at home and 6 away. And the reason why I can say that is the fact of the matter is that we got to have 3 Saturdays in September, or certainly 2, when the stadium is all liveried up for the World Cup, the Women's Rugby World Cup, and there's an international weekend, right? So the way the fixtures will go out, without naming teams, right, that we start off with an away game, because it's a balloon fiesta, the weekend the season starts, unless we play on a Monday night, of course. Start off with an away game. Then we got Carabao Cup game. First home game will be the second week of the season. Then we're away. We'll have an away game. Then it will be the second round of the Carabao Cup, if we're in it. And then we'll be home on the bank holiday fixture. And then it's the international break. And then no matches to the end of September.
And what I always enjoy about that first fixture announcement day is the feeling that every year, is it going to be the year where we get Rovers in the Carabao Cup? Maybe.
Yeah.
There's a chance. And then this year there's an extra round that they've put in for some teams, because some teams have been excluded from the Premiership because there's more people in Europe. So they put like a pre-round into the first round of the Carabao Cup. Not that we're involved in it,
because
but other teams
there are some lower teams.
So there's even less teams going into the first round, and it's a north-south divide. At some stage, we're going to get gas.
We're going to get gas. And for those of you that are watching this live on YouTube, Neil and I are available. Our Proclaimers Tribute Act is available for a very small sum. Yeah, we will deliver it, and we will do all the Proclaimers hits. And the other thing, I have been learning the clarinet. I think I mentioned that before, and I can now play. My goal was to be able to play Ackerbilt Classic Stranger on the Shore, but I can now play When the Red, Red Robin Comes bobbing along. Won't use that at the end of the podcast. And I can play the Match of the Day theme music. And I did have a little go at Fly Me to the Moon as well. But that might be some of our music to begin and end the podcast in the season ahead.
I'd like to say thank you for all the messages on the side of the pod.
600 people.
There's been some really
some
funny
good
messages.
600
really,
people
really
watching
thank
this
you
live,
so
not all at one
point
in time, but some people probably watch it for 30 seconds and switch off. But it's good fun. It's our 5th birthday next week. The very first broadcast I did with Ian Gay, whether I will bring Ian back for a special. I think Ian will come back for a special if there are further changes in the backroom staff at Ashton Gate. I think we all know which one that might be. But 5 years ago, next week, I started a podcast, and we'll be celebrating. I guess our 5th anniversary edition will be the fixtures release one, which will start that at 11:45 on Thursday, with the fixtures coming out at midday. So we'll see who we got. We won't know what bloody day it is because they play Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, but we'll have an indicative idea of what the fixture's going to look like. So I'm in my Hawaiian shirt and enjoying this little bit of sun. It's going to keep going for the weekend. But everybody's tuned in today and listened to us. Thanks a lot for your support, as Neil said, for all the comments, and catch it on Apple Podcasts
and many thanks
Spotify.
to Dave, who's gone.
And Dave's gone. He's preparing for another podcast. One stream in Bristol tonight at 7:00.